So graphics cards, one of the most important components in your PC and something that can either help you generate great images or slow down the rendering process. In today's video, I'm going to get a range of graphics cards and put them through the test so that hopefully I can help you answer the question, what card should I get? I'm going to be starting with a low-end tier card or an entry-level card like the RTX 5060, going up to the mid-tier card like the RTX 4070 Ti Super, which yes, I know it's an all-generation card, but it's probably one of my favorite. And then I'm going to be using also the AMD RX 9070 XT just to compare what an AMD versus Nvidia card does and how it performs against each other. And then for a high-end card, I'm going to be using the card that I'm currently running, the RTX 5090. For this test, I'm going to be using my personal computer, and I'm running an Intel-based system. For the CPU, I have an i7-14700K. For the RAM, I'm running 64 gigs of DDR5. And then for the power supply unit, I have a 1000 watt power supply, and I believe it's platinum rated. Everything else is water cooled, so the only thing that I'll be swapping out is going to be the graphics cards, and I'll be making sure to update the drivers for each of them right after I swap them out. To get started, we're going to be using our RTX 5060, which is going to be the entry-level card. If you look over in the top left corner of the screen, you're going to be able to see the stats for how the card is performing. Here I'm looking at GPU temperature, which right now we're in the low 60s, which is good. Anything over 90 degrees Celsius is where you should start getting concerned. For the memory though, we're almost at 100%. This is an 8 gig card. We're using 7.8, 7.7 gigs out of the 8. And then for the frames per second, you can see we're at around 70. And then whenever the scene clears up, you can see that we're hitting 100 plus. For the RAM of the computer, we're only using 21 out of the 64, which is great. That's just up to how many gigs you want to install the RAM on your computer. The next test here I'm going to be doing is I want to add a scatter tool to the front lawn of the house just to see how fast it actually populates it. Once I click create here, and that was pretty fast. Nothing really changed when it came down to the performance of the card if you keep checking that top left corner. The next thing I want to do is I want to add some brush tool just to see how fast it does it and if there's any lag. Let's go ahead and choose some trees here. And then again, keep checking that top left corner as I place these trees. You can see that the temperature is steady. The VRAM is actually also steady at almost 100%. And then the frames per second, we're hitting low 40s, mid 40s, which is pretty good. This isn't a video game, so you don't really need to hit crazy frames. I think 40 is more than enough. And now let's do a quick fly through just to see if there's any lag while I'm trying to navigate through the scene. Everything seems pretty smooth here. Again, the VRAM is still hanging in there at 7.7, which is pretty expected given that this is only an 8 gig card. And then just one note, this is a pretty large scene. You guys can see the mountains in the background and everything, so if you're just doing small renders, this card is going to be more than enough. And let me run this quick fly through one more time just for the experience. And you guys can see that it's fairly smooth. And this is the image I rendered using the 5060. If you look on the left side, I ran the test 3 times, and each time it took 35 seconds, but this was with SR turned on. SR stands for Super Resolution, which is an AI technology that will essentially render the image at a lower resolution, and then it will upscale it to the desired output that you wanted. In this scenario, it was a 2K image. But then if you look on the right side, you can see that with SR turned off, it actually took 1 minute and 22 seconds to render out that 2K image, just because it's using the 8 gigs of raw power that the card has. And this is the animation I recorded using the 5060. first time I recorded the video, it took 3 minutes and 48 seconds. But the second time, it took 9 minutes and 38 seconds. I did try to record this a third time, but unfortunately it crashed, and I had to do some troubleshooting, like restarting the card and clear the cache to get it to work a third time. Then when I ran it another time, it crashed again. So just so that you guys have clear expectations, an 8 gig card might not be enough to render out animations for large scenes like what you see on screen. And also note that SR has to be turned off whenever you're recording animations, so you don't get that AI help that you would when you render still images. The next card here is going to be our mid-tier card, which is going to be the AMD RX 9070 XT. If you look on the top left, you can see the stats for the card. For the temperature, we're running in the low 50s, which is really good. For the memory, we're using 11.6, 11.5 out of the 16 gigs that this card has to offer, so there's some room to spare. For the RAM, we're only using 18 gigs out of the 64 that I have installed. And for the frames per second, we have about 60 frames, which is really good. Next thing I want to do here is add the scatter to the front lawn of the house, just to see how long that takes and if there's any performance change. And that was almost immediate, kind of like the 5060. The next thing I want to do is add some brush trees to the beach side, just to see if there's any lag. And remember to keep looking at that performance on the top left, just to see if you notice any changes. So there's actually no lag doing this. The temperature's steady, the memory's steady. However, we're getting lower frames per second, which is expected. Like I said before, D5 does not support SR, which is super resolution, or frame boost with AMD cards, so you're going to be getting raw power out of any AMD card. Here it's actually doing just fine because this is a 16 gig card, and like I said, we're not using nowhere near 100%, so there's room to spare and it's making things run pretty smooth. And here's the final render using the AMD RX 9070 XT. It looks just as good as the Nvidia card. And for the recorded times, it took about 54 seconds each time I ran the render. This is longer than the Nvidia card, but that's because SR is always going to be turned off. If you compare SR off time between this one and the 5060, this one actually beats it by about 30 seconds. It took 1 minute and 22 for the 5060 to run it. Unfortunately, SR has to be turned off because D5 does not support it for AMD cards. And this is the animation that was made using the 9070 XT. When it came down to the times, you can see here that it took 2 minutes and 32 seconds each time I ran the render, which is really good for a 16 gig card. And once again, SR is always going to be turned off whenever you're rendering videos. As far as the 4070 Ti Super goes, this is the render we made, and for the time, you can see that it took 42 seconds to render the first time, and the second and third time it only took 41 seconds. Just to make things fair, we did render these with SR turned off, just to see how much better than an AMD card this was, and it's only a couple seconds faster. And this is the animation that we made using the 4070 Ti Super. And as far as the time goes, the first time it took 2 minutes 12 seconds, the second time 2 minutes and 13 seconds, and then the third time it took again 2 minutes and 12 seconds. This is a little faster, so all things considered, we can see that Nvidia has a slight edge over AMD cards when it comes to rendering performance. And for a top tier card, we're going to be using the one and only, the King of Kings, the RTX4070. If you look on the top left, you can see the stats for the card. For the temperature, we're at a steady 50 degrees Celsius, if not a couple of degrees lower. For the VRAM, we're only using 10.6 out of the 32 gigs that this card has. And then for the computer RAM, we're only using 18.6 out of the 64 that I have installed. For the frames per second, we are at a consistent 120. I think it drops a little lower every now and then, but as you hit play, you can see that we're reaching that 120 frames per second. And the next thing we want to do here is add some scatter to the front lawn. We want to pick our scatter type and see how fast it creates it. I'm gonna click on the lawn and then just click create. And that was pretty fast. If you look on the top left, you can see the stats for the card. You can see that we're staying steady at a low 50s for the temperature. For the memory, we're at 10.6 out of the 32 gigs that this card has. And then for the RAM again, we're around 19 gigs out of the 64 I have. Let's go ahead and do a brush tool. And just pay attention to the stats. There's no lag at all. I'm doing this. It's very smooth. We're at around 100 frames per second, which is very, very fast compared to the other cards. And then for the memory, we're only at 10.8 out of the 32, and then the temperature is steady at mid 50s. Let's go ahead and do the fly around. And this is again very smooth. We're at 120 frames per second. Dropped a little there, but now we're back up over at 120. So it's really good. The memory for the card is still consistent at 10.8, so under 50%. And then the temperature again mid 50s, which is great. You only start to worry whenever that number goes up to 90 Celsius or above. So as expected, when it comes down to the numbers, this card is outperforming everything else. However, the experience is very similar to the other cards. This is the image that was rendered, and as far as the time goes, you can see that it took 27 seconds to render this with SR turned on. However, with SR turned off, it didn't take that much longer. It took 32 seconds, which is really, really fast, but that's the kind of power that you can expect out of the RTX 5090. And this is the animation that we made. And for the time, it only took 1 minute and 14 seconds to render out. And again, this was with SR turned off because there's no other option. With all this information, the one card that I can recommend to you guys is going to be one of my all-time favorite, the RTX4070Ti Super. This card is going to be 16 gigs of RAM, and it's going to cost you around $850. But with those $850, what you get are going to be SR compatibility, so you can expect to get really good render times for still images, and it's going to be enough RAM to help you render those long animations. Also, this card is going to be future-proof, so you're going to be able to enjoy it for at least a couple more years before the next generation cards come around. And then one more card that I couldn't get my hands on that I would also recommend is going to be the RTX 5060 Ti. That card's going to be 16 gigs of RAM, and it's going to cost you around $500, but I think you can expect around the same performance as the 4070 Ti Super. With that being said, guys, rendering is an art, so please work on your craft before you spend any money trying to upgrade to a graphics card. If you found the information on this video helpful, please hit a like and don't forget to subscribe. If you have any questions or if you need help with a computer, please leave a comment down below and I'll get to it as soon as I can. I'm Raul, and thanks for watching.